In the winter of 1992, an 83-year-old man walked into the United Nations carrying a fistful of cornmeal and a warning his ancestors had carved into stone 1,000 years before the atomic bomb existed. He had spent more than 40 years trying to get into that building. When they finally let him speak, the room was nearly empty. He delivered his message anyway, sprinkled the cornmeal on the floor of the General Assembly, and told the most powerful nations on earth that the destruction his people had foreseen had already begun. They gave him polite attention. They filed his words away. And then they forgot him. But here is the thing that should stop you cold. The symbol he came to warn them about, a symbol the Hopi had been carving into rock for centuries, had already come true. A people who had never seen a weapon like it described the atomic bomb before it was ever built. The question is how? And the answer is stranger than a coincidence. To understand why that moment matters, you have to understand the man, because almost everything you might assume about him is wrong. He was not a mystic in robes. His name was Thomas Banyacya, and he was born on the 2nd of June, 1909, in the village of Moenkopi, Arizona, into the wolf, fox, and coyote clans of the Hopi. As a boy, he was sent to government-run Indian schools, and there they took his name from him. They made him answer to Thomas Jenkins, an Anglo name assigned to him because the Hopi name he was born with was not considered acceptable. He hated it so much that for the rest of his life he insisted on being called Banyacya. That detail tells you who he was. This was a man who would not surrender the smallest piece of his identity, no matter what it cost him. And it cost him a great deal. When the Second World War came and the government ordered him to register for the draft, Banyacya refused. The Hopi way forbade killing, and he would not violate it. So they sent him to prison. Not for a few weeks. He spent roughly 7 years behind bars across the 1940s for that refusal, jailed again and again for standing on his beliefs. He was not a man chasing attention. He was a man who had already given up years of his freedom rather than compromise. Remember that, because it changes how you hear everything he said later. When a man like that tells you the world is running out of time, he's not performing, he's warning you. But here is the part that changes everything. Banyacya was not predicting some vague, shapeless doom. He was carrying a message about one specific object his people had described long before it existed. The Hopi called it the gourd of ashes. In their oldest teachings, handed down from the Great Spirit they call Masauhu, there was a warning that one day a gourd full of ashes would be dropped from the sky, and where it fell, the water would boil, the earth would burn, nothing would grow for a long time, and many people would die. The gourd of ashes marked the beginning of the end of the materialistic world. Now sit with how strange that is. A gourd is a hollowed vessel. Fill it with ashes, drop it, and everything beneath it dies. For centuries, the Hopi taught this as sacred knowledge, part of a larger set of prophecies about signs that would appear as the present world neared its end. And those other signs are just as unsettling. The elders spoke of horseless wagons that would travel on black ribbons stretched across the land. And then came the automobile and the paved highway. They spoke of roads appearing in the sky, and then came aircraft. They spoke of a spider's web crisscrossing the earth, and of people speaking through it across great distances. Much of this is captured near the village of Orabi, one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America, on a panel of ancient carvings called Prophecy Rock. It shows two paths for humanity. One path stays low, close to the earth and the growth of corn. The other rises into a jagged, disconnected line, the road of technological achievement severed from nature, the path that ends in chaos. Most people hear all this and shrug. Poetic myths, they say. A gourd of ashes could mean anything. And they would have a point, except for what happened in 1948, because that is the year this stopped being a legend and became something documented. For most of Hopi history, this knowledge was guarded. It was not shared with outsiders, and much of it was not even shared openly among the villages. It was sacred, kept for the right time. And then, in the summer of 1945, the first atomic bomb was tested at a site in New Mexico, in the desert not far from Hopi land. Weeks later, Hiroshima and Nagasaki vanished under 2 more. When the Hopi elders finally saw the photographs of those mushroom clouds, that towering column of ash and fire rising into the sky, they did not react the way the rest of the world did. They did not ask what it was. They recognized it. This, they said, was the gourd of ashes. The prophecy their ancestors had carved into stone had just happened in their own lifetime, on the far side of the world. And it shook them, because the teaching said the gourd of ashes was a threshold, the sign that the final chapter of this world had begun. So, in December of 1948, something happened that had never happened before. Traditional leaders from the different Hopi villages and religious societies came together in one place to compare the pieces of prophecy each of them had been keeping in secret. For the first time, they laid the fragments side by side, and what they assembled convinced them the window was closing. The bomb was not the end. It was a warning shot. Their teaching said this world would end in a great purification, and the gourd of ashes meant the countdown had started, which raised the question that would haunt them for the next 50 years. If the sign had already come, how much time was left, and who would tell the world before it ran out? The answer was 4 men. At that 1948 gathering, the elders made a decision that broke with centuries of silence. They chose 4 messengers and gave them a mandate. Take the prophecies out of the kivas and into the world. Warn the nations, and do not stop until the message has been heard. The 4 were Thomas Banyacya, David Manongya, Dan Evehema, and Dan Kachongva, some of them already old men, one of them said to be near 100. Banyacya, still in his late 30s, freshly out of the shadow of prison, was chosen in part because he could move between worlds. He spoke English. He could stand in front of officials and reporters and translate a spiritual vision into words the modern world might understand. Understand the scale of what was being asked. The Hopi are a small nation, only around 15,000 people. And these 4 were being told to carry a warning to the entire human race on behalf of ancestors who believed the fate of the world hung on whether anyone listened. It was a crushing burden, and Banyacya carried it for the rest of his life. He organized caravans, he met with officials, he tried again and again to get the government and the public to take the message seriously. And again, he was dismissed as a curiosity. But there was one prophecy among all the others that told him exactly where the message was finally supposed to be delivered. Not to a president, not to a newspaper, to a specific building that the ancient teachings had described in unmistakable detail, a house made of mica, standing on an eastern shore, where the leaders of many nations would gather to solve their problems without war. To Banyacya, there was only one building on earth that matched, a great house of glass and mica on the eastern shore of the country, where the nations of the world assembled to keep the peace. The United Nations. The prophecy said a Hopi messenger would take the message of peace to that house of mica, and the elders gave him a precise instruction about how it would happen. He would have to knock on the door 4 times, not as a metaphor, 4 attempts. As early as 1959, a delegation of Hopi leaders had traveled to the UN building to try to fulfill this mission and been turned away. Over the decades, Banyacya kept knocking. He was often welcomed warmly by individual officials, invited in for conversation, and then, when he asked to actually address the assembly, refused. Once, twice, 3 times the door closed. Most men would have read that as a message and stopped. Banyacya read it as confirmation, because the elders had told him it would take 4 knocks, and he had only used 3. In October of 1991, he hand-delivered a letter and a sacred prayer feather to a UN official named John Washburn in the office of the Secretary General, formally requesting his moment. And at last, the 4th knock landed. He was told he could speak before the General Assembly in December of 1992, during the International Year dedicated to the world's indigenous peoples. After more than 40 years of trying, an old man was finally going to stand at the most important podium on earth and deliver the warning his ancestors had entrusted to him. And what happened in that room is the part that still stings. Picture the day. The 11th of December 1992. Thomas Banyacya, now 83 years old, stands inside the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations, the House of Mica, from a prophecy older than the building by centuries. Before he speaks, Oren Lyons, the faithkeeper of the Six Nations, gives 3 shouts into the chamber, a spiritual announcement to the Great Spirit that a message of importance is about to be delivered. Then Banyacya steps forward. He takes his sacred cornmeal and sprinkles it carefully beside the podium of the General Assembly, blessing the ground of the most powerful diplomatic room in the world with the oldest gesture of his people. And then he looks up at the seats, and most of them are empty. This is the detail that turns the story from triumph to tragedy. The session was in recess. The great powers, the ambassadors, the decision-makers he had spent 4 decades trying to reach, they were not there. Only a handful of delegates remained to hear him. He had knocked 4 times. He had waited 40 years. He had crossed a lifetime to reach that podium. And when the door finally opened, the room on the other side was nearly deserted. A lesser man might have folded the message back into his pocket. Banyacya did not. He had not come this far to speak to a full house. He had come to deliver a warning, and whether 10 people heard it or 10,000, he was going to say it out loud, on the record, in the House of Mica, exactly as his ancestors had instructed. So he began to speak, and what he told those empty chairs was the distilled warning of 1,000 years. He told them the Hopi believed humanity had already lived through and destroyed earlier worlds that ended when people turned away from moral and spiritual balance and misused their power for selfish ends. He told them this present world, the fourth, was now approaching its own purification, and that the signs his people had waited for had nearly all arrived. The gourd of ashes had fallen. Someone had traveled to the moon and brought something back, another prophesied sign that nature would begin to lose its balance. He described a world poisoning its own food, air, and water, a world of endless wars and material greed, and he warned that if humanity did not wake up, the great purification would come to destroy this world as the previous ones had been destroyed. But he did not come only to condemn. That is what people miss. He came to offer the choice carved into prophecy rock, the 2 paths. One road led to ruin, the other, the low road close to the earth, still led to survival and to a 5th world of peace. Humanity, he said, still had time to choose. He pointed to the words inscribed on the United Nations' own wall, that the nations would beat their swords into plowshares and study war no more, and he asked them simply to actually do it. He had 10 minutes. He used them to try to save the world, and when he finished, after a lifetime of prison, dismissal, and closed doors, his words were recorded, archived in the UN's own library, and then, by the world he was trying to warn, effectively ignored. The great purification he described did not pause. The empty chairs stayed empty. So more than 30 years later, we are left with the same question the hook opened with. Was it prophecy, or was it coincidence? And an honest answer has to hold both possibilities at once. The skeptic has a real case. Much of the prophecy was only written down and interpreted for outsiders after 1945, which means the gourd of ashes may have been matched to the bomb in hindsight. A hollow vessel of ashes is a poetic image, vague enough to fit more than one disaster. These are fair objections, and they deserve to be said plainly. But here is what the skeptic cannot fully explain away. The Hopi did not just describe a weapon, they described a house of mica where nations would gather to end war, and that house was built. They described horseless wagons on black ribbons and roads in the sky, and those arrived too. And they attached to all of it a moral warning that reads, "Today, less like superstition and more like an environmental forecast written 1,000 years early." Thomas Banyacya died on the 6th of February 1999, the last of the 4 messengers chosen in 1948. He spent half a century carrying a message almost no one wanted to hear, and he never once dropped it. Whether you believe his ancestors saw the future or simply understood human nature better than we do, the fact remains that someone carved a warning about ashes falling from the sky into stone, centuries before the sky learned how to burn. The least we can do is listen. So tell me in the comments, do you think the Hopi truly saw it coming, or did we just read the bomb backward into an old story? And if you want the third and final sign decoded, the one Banyacya said was still to come, subscribe. Because that is the next story I'm going to tell.